Alrighty, I think we are all set. Sorry about this, folks. Trust me, no one is more aggravated by this thing than I am right now. There we go. All right. No, wrong one. There we go. No? Yes? Yes. Good. Sorry about that. All right, where were we? Surprised but pleased your return. Approach mid-northern hemisphere, region of Archimedes, 40,000 toises off nearest Apennine range. And there's a footnote here. To get to where we were before we started, finished, broke, which says about 50 miles. So 40,000 toises for you space cadets out there is equal to 50 miles, about. I don't know what a toys is, but it's a unit of measurement. The message broke off, but even its importance was overshadowed. Miko stood in the center of the helio room, triumphantly reading the light indicator. Its beams swung on the scale, which chanced to be almost directly over Anita's head. I saw Miko's expression change. A look of surprise, amazement came to him. Why, he gasped. He stood staring, almost stupidly staring for an instant. And as I regarded him with fascinated horror, there came upon his heavy gray face a look of dawning comprehension. And I heard Snap's startled intake of breath. He moved to the spectroheliograph, where the Z-ray connections were still humming. But with a leap, Miko flung him away. Off with you! Moa, watch him! Haljan, don't move! Again Miko stood staring. Oh, dear God, I saw now that he was staring at Anita. Why, George Prince, how strange you look! Anita did not move. She was stricken with horror. She shrank back against the wall, huddled in her cloak. Miko's sardonic voice came again. How strange you look, Prince! He took a step forward. He was grim and calm, horribly calm, deliberate, gloating, like a great gray monster in human form toying with a fascinated, imprisoned bird. Move just a little, Prince. Let the Z-ray light fall more fully. Anita's head was bare, that pale, Hamlet-like face. Dear God, the Z-light reflection lay gray and penetrating upon it. Mikos took another step, peering, grinning. How amazing, George Prince! Why, I can hardly believe it. Moa was armed with an electronic cylinder. For all her amazement, what turgid emotions sweeping her I can only guess, she never took her eyes from Snap and me. Beck, don't move, either of you, she hissed it at us. Then Miko leaped at Anita like a giant gray leopard pouncing. Away with that cloak, Prince! I stood cold and numbed, and realization came at last. The faint Z-light glow had fallen by chance upon Anita's face, penetrated the flesh, exposed, faintly glowing, the bone line of her jaw, unmasked the waxen art of Glutz. And Miko had seen it. Why, George, how surprising! Away with that cloak! He seized her wrist, drew her forward, beyond the shaft of Zed-light, into the brilliant light of the moon, and ripped her cloak from her. The gentle curves of her woman's figure were so unmistakable. And as Miko gazed at them, all his calm triumph swept away. "Why, Anita!" I heard Moa mutter. "So that is it?" A venomous, flashing look. A shaft from me to Anita and back again. "So that is it?" "Why, Anita!" Miko's great arms gathered her up as though she were a child. "So I have you back! From the dead delivered back to me!" "Greg!" Snap's warning and his grip over my shoulders brought me a measure of sanity. I had tensed to spring. I stood, quivering, and Moa thrust her weapon against my face. The helio mirrors were swaying again with another message from Grantline, but it came ignored by us all. In the glare of moonlight by the forward window, Miko held Anita, his great hands pawing her with triumphant, possessive caresses. "So, little Anita, you are given back to me!" Against her futile struggles, he held her. Dear God, if only I had had the wit to have prevented this! Chapter 20. The Grantline Camp. In the mid-northern hemisphere, upon the earthward side of the moon, the giant crater of Archimedes stood brooding in silent majesty. Grim, lofty walls, broken, pitted and scarred, rising precipitous to the upper circular rim. Night had just fallen. The sunlight clung to the crater heights. It tinged with flame the jagged peaks of the Apennine Mountains. Apennine? I should really look up how that's pronounced. Which rose in tiers at the horizon, and it flung great inky shadows over the intervening lowlands. Northward, the Mare Imbrium stretched mysterious and purple, its million rills and ridges and crater holes flattened by distance and the gathering darkness into a seeming level surface. The night slowly deepened. The dead black vault of the sky blazed with its brilliant starry gems. The gibbous earth hung high above the horizon, motionless save for the invisible pendulum sway over the tiny arc of its libration, widening to quadrature, casting upon the bleak, naked lunar landscape its mellow earth glow. Slow, measured process, this coming of the lunar night. For an Earth day, the sunset slowly faded on the Apennines. The poised Earth widened a little further. An Earth day of time, with the Earth disk visibly rotating, the faint tracery of its oceans and continents passing in slow, majestic review. Another Earth day interval, then another, and another. Full night now enveloped Archimedes. Splotches of Earth light and starlight sheen slowly shifted as the night advanced. Between the great crater and the nearby mountains, the broken, pseudo-level lowlands lay wan in the Earthlight. A few hundred miles, as distance would be measured upon Earth. A million rills were here. Valleys and ridges, ravines, sharp-walled canyons, cliffs and crags, tiny craters like pockmarks. Naked, gray, porous rock everywhere. The denuded landscape. Cracked and scarred and tumbled, as though some inexorable Titan torch had seared and crumbled and broken it, left it now congealed like a wind-lashed sea, abruptly frozen into immobility. Moonlight upon earth so gently shines to make a romantic lover's smile. But the reality of the lunar night is cold beyond human rationality. Cold and darkly silent. Grim desolation. Awesome. majestic, a frowning majesty that even to the most intrepid human beholder is inconceivably forbidding. And there were humans here now. On this tumbled plain between Archimedes and the mountains, one small crater amid the million of its fellows was distinguished this night by the presence of humans. The Grantline camp! It huddled in the deepest purple shadows on the side of a bowl-like pit, a crudely circular orifice with a scant 2 miles across its rippling rim. There was faint light here to mark the presence of the living intruders, the blue glow radiance of the moral tube lights under a spread of glassite. The Grantline camp stood midway up one of the inner cliff walls of the little crater. The broken, rock-strewn floor, 2 miles wide, lay 500 feet below the camp. Behind it, the jagged, precipitous cliff rose another 500 to the heights of the upper rim. A broad, level shelf hung midway up the cliff, and upon it Grantline had built his little group of glassite dome shelters. Viewed from above, there was the darkly purple crater floor, the upflung circular rim where the earthlight tinged the spires and crags with yellow sheen, and on the shelf, like a huddled group of birds' nests, Grantline's domes clung and gazed down upon the inner valley. Intricate task, the building of these glassite shelters. There were three. The main one stood at the brink of the ledge, a quadrangle of glassite walls, 100 feet in length by half as wide, and a scant 10 feet high to its flat-arched dome roof. Built for this purpose in Great New York, Grantline had brought his aluminite girders and braces and the glassite panels in sections. The air here on the moon's surface was negligible, a scant 1/5000th of the atmospheric pressure at sea level on Earth. But within the glassite shelter, a normal Earth pressure must be maintained. Rigidly braced double walls to withstand the explosive tendency, with no external pressure to counteract it. A tremendous necessity for mechanical equipment had burdened Grantline's small ship to its capacity. The chemistry of manufactured air, the pressure equalizers, renewers, respirators, the lighting and temperature maintenance systems, all the mechanics of a space flyer were here. And within the glassite double walls there was necessity for a constant circulation of the Erentz temperature insulating system. And there's a footnote here. An intricate system of insulation against extremes of temperature, developed by the Erentz Kinetic Energy Corporation in the 21st century. Within the hollow double shell of a shelter wall, or an explorer's helmet suit, or a space flyer's hull, an oscillating semi-vacuum current was maintained, an extremely rarefied air, magnetically charged, and maintained in rapid oscillating motion. Across this field the outer cold, or heat, as the case might be, could penetrate only with slow radiation. This Erentz system gave the most perfect temperature insulation known in its day. Without it, interplanetary flight would have been impossible. And it served a double purpose. Developed at first for temperature insulation only, the Erentz system surprisingly brought to light one of the most important discoveries made in the realms of physics of the century. It was found that any flashing, oscillating current, whether electronic or the semi-vacuum of rarefied air, or even a thin sheet of whirling fluid, gave also a pressure insulation. Sorry. The kinetic energy of the rapid movement was found to absorb within itself the latent energy of the unequal pressure. Oh, here we go. The intricate postulates and mathematical formulae necessary to demonstrate the operation of the physical laws involved would be out of place here. Oh, here we go. It continues. It's like a page long. The Planetara was so equipped against the explosive tendency of its inner air pressures when flying in the near vacuum of space. In the case of Grantline's glassite shelters, the latent energy of his room interior air pressure went largely into a kinetic energy, which in practical effect resulted only in the slight acceleration of the vacuum current, and thus never reached the outer wall. The Errant's engineers claimed for their system a pressure absorption of 97.4%, leaving, in Grantline's case, only 2.6% of room pressure to be held by the building's aluminite bracers. It may be interesting to note that in this connection out that without the Arentz system as a basis, the great subsea developments on Earth and Mars of the 21st century would also have been impossible. Equipped with a fluid circulation device of the Arentz principle within its double hull, the first submarine was able to penetrate the great ocean deeps, withstanding the tremendous ocean pressures at depths of 4,000 fathoms. So there's a bit to dissect there. So for temperature insulation, using vacuum as an insulator actually is a real thing, um, that you can actually see with what are those called? Dewar flasks, Dewar, Dewar flasks, um, which are basically flasks like containers within containers that have a separation of vacuum in between. A better example is in high-rise buildings, actually, and indeed airplanes, where you have you have like double layered windows, which have a layer of vacuum in between, and that manages to keep temperature from bleeding out, or uh, like warm temperatures inside from bleeding out and hot temperatures from outside coming in. The best example, I would say, though, is thermoses. A thermos basically is, in its own way, kind of a Dewar flask, sort of. Although I think Dewar flasks are usually used for extreme cold. And by extreme, I mean approaching absolute zero if possible, if memory serves, which it may not. I may be dead wrong, and if so, somebody please correct me. But yeah, thermoses are a great example. Now, the bit at the end about submarines, I think, is cute. Um, because, again, this is 1930. This is before. Actually, would Germany have had U-boats by then? I don't remember when the first U-boat was constructed. Submersibles were a thing. I don't know about 4,000 fathoms. How deep is 4,000 fathoms? I realize that this is all being streamed, but right now we're gonna... How deep is 4,000 fathoms? Convert fathoms to feet. A fathom is 6 feet, so... if a fathom is 6 feet... 6 times 4,000. I can't do that in my head. 24,000 feet, which is, call it about 5 miles or so. A little less than 5 miles, I think, um, of water, which is pretty deep. Um, which incidentally is a bit shallower by about 10,000 feet, the by a couple miles, uh, is a bit shallower than the Mariana Trench. Yeah, okay. That is my interruption. I swear to God, that footnote was real, though. That was a long footnote. That's the longest one yet. I wonder if any others are going to be that long. And within the glassite double walls, there was a necessity There was necessity for a constant circulation of the Erentz temperature insulating system. There was this main Grantline building, stretching low and rectangular along the front edge of the ledge. Within it were living rooms, mess room, and kitchen. 50 feet behind it, connected by a narrow passage of glassite, was a similar, though smaller, structure. The mechanical control rooms, with their humming, vibrating mechanisms, were here. And an instrument room with signaling apparatus, senders, receivers, mirror grids, and audiophones of several varieties, and an telescope, small but modern, with a dome overhead like a little Earth observatory. How audiophones work? Well, I guess audiophones could work if they're picking up like a electronic signal and then vibrating accordingly. But you obviously don't have the atmosphere on the moon, or indeed in the vacuum of space. For traditional sound waves, you have to convert them from someplace. From this instrument building, beside the connecting pedestrian passage, wire cables for light, and air tubes and strings and bundles of instrument wires ran to the main structure, gray snakes upon the porous, gray lunar rock. The third building seemed a lean-to banked against the cliff wall, a slanting shed wall of glassite 50 feet high and 200 in length. Under it, for months, Grantline's borers had dug into the cliff. Braced tunnels were here, penetrating back and downward into this vein of radioactive rock. The work was over now. The borers had been dismantled and packed away. At one end of the cliff the mining equipment lay, piled in a litter. There was a heap of discarded ore where Grantline had carted and dumped it after his first crude refining process had yielded it as waste. The ore slag lay like powder flakes, strewn down the cliff. Tracks and ore carts along the ledge stood discarded, mute evidence of the weeks and months of work these helmeted miners had undergone, struggling upon this airless, frowning world. But now all that was finished. The radioactive ore was sufficiently concentrated. It lay, this treasure, in a 70-foot pile behind the glassite lean-to, with a cage of wires over it and an insulation barrage guarding its gamma rays from escaping to mark its presence. The ore shelter was dark, the other two buildings were lighted, and there were small lights mounted at intervals about the camp and along the edge of the ledge. A spider ladder, with tiny platforms some 20 feet one above the other, hung precariously to the cliff face. It descended the 500 feet to the crater floor, and, behind the camp, it mounted the jagged cliff face to the upper rim height, where a small observatory platform was placed. Such was the outer aspect of the Grantline treasure camp near the beginning of this lunar night, when, unbeknown to Grantline and his score of men, the Planetara with its Brigands was approaching. The night was perhaps a sixth advanced. Full night. No breath of cloud to mar the brilliant starry heavens. The quadrant Earth hung poised like a giant mellow moon over Grantline's crater. A bright Earth, yet no air was here on this lunar surface to spread its light. Only a glow, mingling with the spots of blue tube light on the poles along the cliff, and the radiance from the lighted buildings. The crater floor was dimly purple. Beyond the opposite upper rim, from the camp height, the towering top of distant Archimedes was visible. No evidence of movement showed about the silent camp. Then a pressure door in an end of the main building opened its tiny series of locks. A bent figure came out. The lock closed. The figure straightened and gazed about the camp. Grotesque, bloated semblance of a man, helmeted, with rounded dome hood suggestion of an ancient sea diver, yet goggled and trunked like a gas-masked fighter of the 20th century war. He stood presently and disconnected metal weights which were upon his shoes. And there's another footnote here. Within the Grantline buildings, it was found more convenient to use a gravity normal to Earth. This was maintained by the wearing of metal-weighted shoes and metal-loaded belt. The moon gravity is normally approximately 1/6 the gravity of Earth. And I believe that's accurate. Then he stood erect again, and with giant strides bounded along the cliff. Fantastic figure in the blue-lit gloom. A child's dream of crags and rocks and strange lights with a single monstrous figure in 7-league boots. He went the length of the ledge with his 20-foot strides, inspected the lights and made adjustments, came back and climbed with agile, bounding leaps up the spider ladder to the dome on the crater top. A light flashed on up there. Then it was extinguished. The goggled, bloated figure came leaping down after a moment. Grantline's exterior watchman making his rounds. He came back to the main building, fastened the weights on his shoes, signaled within. The lock opened. The figure went inside. It was early evening, after the dinner hour and before the time of sleep, according to the camp routine Grantline was maintaining. 9 p.m. of Earth Eastern American Time, recorded now upon his Earth chronometer. In the living room of the main building, Johnny Grantline sat with a dozen of his men dispersed about the room, whiling away as best they could the lonesome hours.
All as usual. This cursed moon. When I get home, if I ever do get home. Say your say, Wilkes, but you'll spend your share of the gold leaf and thank your constellations that you had the chance. Let 'em alone. Come on, Wilkes, take a hand here. This game is no good with 3.
The man who had been outside flung his hissing helmet recklessly to the floor and unsealed his suit.
Here, get me out of this. Nah, I won't play. I can't play a cursed game with nothing at stake. Commissioner's orders.
A laugh went up at the sharp look Johnny Grantline flung from where he sat reading in a corner of the room.
Commander's orders. No gambling gold leafers tolerated here.
Play the game, Wilkes, Grantline said quietly. We all know it's infernal doing nothing.
He's been struck by Earthlight, another man laughed. Commander, I told you not to let this guy Wilkes out at night.
A rough but good-natured lot of men, jolly and raucous by nature in their leisure hours. But there was too much leisure here now. Their mirth had a hollow sound. In older times, explorers of the frozen polar zones had to cope with inactivity, loneliness, and despair. But at least they were on their native world. The grimness of the moon was eating into the courage of Grantline's men. An unreality here, a weirdness. These fantastic crags, the deadly silence. The nights, almost 2 weeks of Earth time in length, congealed by the deadly frigidity of space. The days of black sky, blaring stars, and flaming sun, with no atmosphere to diffuse the daylight. Days of weird, blending sheen of illumination, with most of the sun's heat radiating so swiftly from the naked lunar surface that the outer temperature was still cold. And day and night, always the familiar beloved Earth disk hanging poised up near the zenith. From thinnest crescent to full Earth, and then steadily back again to crescent. All so abnormal, irrational, disturbing to human senses. With the mining work over, an irritability grew upon Grantline's men. And perhaps, since the human mind is so wonderful, elusive a thing, there lay upon these men an indefinable sense of impending disaster. Johnny Grantline felt it. He thought about it now as he sat in the room corner watching Wilkes being forced into the Plaget game, and he found it strong within him. Unreasonable, ominous depression. Barring the accident which had disabled his little spaceship when they reached this small crater hole, his expedition had gone well. His instruments and the information he had from the former explorers had picked up the ore vein with a scant month of search. The vein had now been exhausted, but the treasure was here. Nothing was left but to wait for the Planetara. The men were talking of that now.
She ought to be well midway from here to Ferric Shan by now. When do you figure she'll be back here and signal us?
20 days. Give her another 5 now to Mars and 5 in port. That's 10. We'll pick her signals in 3 weeks, mark me.
3 weeks? Give me 3 weeks of reasonable sunrise and sunset. This cursed moon. You mean, Williams, next daylight?
Ha! He's inventing a lunar language. You'll be a moon man yet if you live here long enough.
Olaf Svensson, the big blond fellow from the Scandia fjords, came and flung himself down by Grantline. Oh boy, here we go. I tank the bane with that not enough to do, Commander. If the ore just won't give out.
3 weeks. It isn't very long, Ollie.
No, maybe not. From across the room, somebody was saying,
If the comet hadn't smashed us, damn me, but I'd ask the commander to let some of us take her back. The discarded equipment could go.
Shut up, Billy. She is smashed.
the little comet, cruising in search of the ore, had come to grief just as the ore was found. It lay now on the crater floor with its nose bashed into an upflung spire of rock, wrecked beyond repair. Save for the prearrangement with the Planetara, the Grantline party would have been helpless here on the moon. Knowledge of that, although no one ever suspected but that the Planetara would come safely, served to add to the men's depression. They were cut off, virtually helpless on a strange world. Their signaling devices were inadequate even to reach Earth. Grantline's power batteries were running low, and there's a footnote here. The Gravely storage tanks, the power used by the Grantline expedition, were heavy and bulky affairs. Economy of space on the Comet allowed but few of them. He could not attempt wide-flung signals without jeopardizing the power necessary for the routine of his camp in the event of the Planetara being delayed. Nor was his electro-telescope adequate to pick small objects at any great distance. And there's another footnote here. Electro-telescopes of most modern use and power were too large and used too much power to be available to Grantline. All of Grantline's effort, in truth, had gone into equipment for the finding and gathering of the treasure. The safety of the expedition had to that extent been neglected. Swenson was mentioning that now.
You all agreed to it, Johnny said shortly. Every man here voted that, above everything, what we wanted was to get the radium.
A dynamic little fellow, this Johnny Grantline, short of temper sometimes, but always just, and a perfect leader of men. In stature he was almost as small as Snap, but he was thick-set, with a smooth-shaven, keen-eyed, square-jawed face, and a shock of brown tousled hair. A man of 35, though the decision of his manner, the quiet dominance of his voice, made him seem older. He stood up now, surveying the blue-lit glassite room with its low ceiling close overhead. He was bow-legged. In movement he seemed to roll with a stiff-legged gait like some sea captain of former days on the deck of his swaying ship. Queer-looking figure. Heavy flannel shirt and trousers, boots heavily weighted, and bulky metal-loaded belt strapped about his waist. He grinned at Svensson.
When we divide this treasure, everyone will be happy, Ollie.
The treasure was estimated by Grantline to be the equivalent of 90 millions in gold leaf. 110 millions in the gross as it now stood, with 20 millions to be deducted by the Federated refiners for reducing it to the standard purity of commercial radium. 90 millions, with only $1.5 million to come off for expedition expenses, and the Planetara's company share another $1 million. A nice little stake. Grantline strode across the room with his rolling gait.
Cheer up, boys. Who's winning there? I say, you fellows.
An audiophone buzzer interrupted him, a call from the duty man in the instrument room of the nearby building. Grantline clicked the receiver. The room fell into silence. Any call was unusual. Nothing ever happened here in the camp. The duty man's voice sounded over the comm.
Signal's coming. Not clear. Will you come over, Commander?
Signals. It was never Grantline's way to enforce needless discipline. He offered no objection when every man in the camp rushed through the connecting passages. They crowded the instrument room where the tense duty man sat bending over his helio receivers. The mirrors were swaying. The duty man looked up and met Grantline's gaze.
I ran it up to the highest intensity, Commander. We ought to get it, not let it pass.
Low scale, Peter?
Yes, weakest infrared. I'm bringing it up, even though it uses too much of our power.
The duty man was apologetic.
Get it,
said Grantline shortly.
I had a swing a minute ago. I think it's the Planetara.
Planetara?
The crowding group of men chorused it. How could it be the Planetara? But it was. The call presently came in clear. Unmistakably the Planetara, turned back now from her course to Ferrok-Shahn.
How far away, Peter?
The duty man consulted the needles of his dial scale.
Close. Very weak infrared, but close. Around 30,000 miles, maybe? It's Snapdean calling.
The Planetara here within 30,000 miles. Excitement and pleasure swept the room. The Planetara's coming had for so long been awaited so eagerly. The excitement communicated to Grantline. It was unlike him to be incautious, yet now, with no thought save that some unforeseen and pleasing circumstance had brought the Planetara ahead of time, incautious Grantline certainly was.
Raise the ore barrage.
I'll go. My suit is here.
I'll go. My suit is here.
Sorry. A willing volunteer rushed out to the ore shed. The gamma rays, which in the helio room of the Planetara came so unwelcome to Snap and me, were loosed.
Can you send, Peter?
Grantline demanded.
Yes, with more power.
Use it.
Johnny dictated the message of his location, which we received. In his incautious excitement, he ignored the secret code. An interval passed. The ore was occulted again. No message had come from us, just Snap's routine signal in the weak infrared, which we hoped Grantline would not get. The men crowding Grantline's instrument room waited in tense silence. Then Grantline tried the telescope. Its current weakened the lights with the drain upon the distributors, and cooled the room with a sudden deadly chill as the Erentz insulating system slowed down. The duty man looked suddenly frightened.
You'll bulge out our walls, Commander. The internal pressure.
We'll chance it.
They picked up the image of the Planetara. It came from the telescope and shone clear on the grid, the segment of starfield with a tiny cigar-shaped blob. Clear enough to be unmistakable. The Planetara. Here now over the moon, almost directly overhead, poised at what the altimeter scale showed to be a fraction under 30,000 miles. The men gazed in awed silence. The Planetara coming. But the altimeter needle was motionless. The Planetara was hanging poised. A sudden gasp went about the room. The men stood with whitening faces, gazing at the Planetara's image, and at the altimeter needle. It was moving. The Planetara was descending, but not with an orderly swoop. The image showed the ship clearly. The bow tilted up, then dipped down, but then in a moment it swung up again. The ship turned partly over, righted itself, then swayed again, drunkenly. The watching men were stricken into horrified silence. The Planetara's image momentarily, horribly grew larger, swaying, then turning completely over, rotating slowly end over end. The Planetara, out of control, was falling. Chapter 21. The Wreck of the Planetara. On the Planetara, in the helio room, Snap and I looked with Moa's weapon upon us. Stood with Moa's weapon upon us. Miko held Anita, triumphant, possessive. Then, as she struggled, a gentleness came to this strange Martian giant. Perhaps he really loved her. Looking back on it, I sometimes think so.
Anita, do not fear me.
He held her away from him.
I would not harm you. I want your love.
Irony came to him.
And I thought I had killed you, but it was only your brother.
He partly turned. I was aware of how alert was his attention. He grinned.
Hold them, Moa. Don't let them do anything foolish. So, Anita, you were masquerading to spy upon me? That was wrong of you.
He was again ironic. Anita had not spoken. She held herself tensely away from Miko. She had flashed me a look, just one. What horrible mischance to have brought this catastrophe! The completion of Grantline's message had come unnoticed by us all.
Look, Grantline again,
Snap said abruptly. But the mirrors were steadying. We had no recording tape apparatus. The rest of the message was lost. The mirrors pulsed and then steadied. No further message came. There was an interval while Miko waited. He held Anita in the hollow of his great arm.
Quiet, little bird. Do not fear me. I have work to do, Anita. This is our great adventure. We will be rich, you and I. All the luxuries 3 worlds can offer, all for us when this is over. Careful, Moa. This Haljan has no wit.
Well, could he say it? I, who had been so witless to let this come upon us. Moa's weapon prodded me. Her voice hissed at me with all the venom of a reptile enraged.
So that was your game, Greg Haljan, and I was so graceless to admit love for you.
Snap murmured in my ear.
Don't move, Greg. She's reckless.
She heard it. She whirled on him.
We have lost George Prince, it seems. Well, we will survive without his ore knowledge. And you, Dean, and this Haljan, mark me, I will kill you both if you cause trouble.
Miko was gloating.
Don't kill them yet, Moa. What was it Grantline said? Near the crater of Archimedes? Ring us down, Haljan. We'll land.
He signaled the turret, gave Coniston the Grantline message, and audiophoned it below to Hahn. The news spread about the ship. The bandits were jubilant.
We'll land now, Haljan. Ring us down. Come, Anita, and I will go with you to the turret.
I found my voice. To what destination?
Near Archimedes, the Apennine side. Keep well away from the Grantline camp. We will probably sight it as we descend.
There was no trajectory needed. We were almost over Archimedes now. I could drop us with a visible instrumental course. My mind was whirling with a confusion of thoughts. What could we do? What could we dare attempt to do? I met Snap's gaze.
Ring us down, Greg, he said quietly.
I nodded. I pushed Moa's weapon away. You don't need that. I obey orders. We went to the turret. Moa watched me and Snap, a grim, cold Amazon. She avoided looking at Anita, whom Miko helped down the ladders with a strange mixture of courtier-like grace and amused irony. Coniston gazed at Anita with a falling jaw.
I say, not George Prince? The girl? No time for argument now, Miko commanded. It's the girl masquerading as her brother. Get below, Coniston. Haljan takes us down.
The astounded Englishman continued gazing at Anita.
I mean to say, where to on the moon? Not to encounter Grantline at once, Miko. Our equipment is not ready. Of course not. We will land well away. He won't be suspicious. We can signal him again after we land. We will have time to plan to assemble the equipment. Get below, I told you.
The reluctant Coniston left us. I took the controls. Miko, still holding Anita as though she were a child, sat beside me.
We will watch him, little Anita. A skilled fellow at this sort of work.
I rang my signals for the shifting of the gravity plates. The answer should have come from below within a second or two, but it did not. Miko regarded me with his great bushy eyebrows upraised.
Ring again, Haljan.
I duplicated. No answer. The silence was frightening, ominous. Miko muttered.
That accursed Han! Ring again!
I sent the imperative emergency demand. No answer. A second or two. Then all of us in the turret were startled, transfixed. From below came a sudden hiss. It sounded in the turret. It came from the shifting room call grid, the hissing of the pneumatic valves of the plate shifters in the lower control room. The valves were opening, the plates automatically shifting into neutral and disconnecting. An instant of startled silence. Miko may have realized the significance of what had happened. Certainly Snap and I did. The hissing ceased. I gripped the emergency plate shifter switch which hung over my head. Its disk was dead. The plates were dead in neutral. In the positions they were only placed while in port. And their shifting mechanisms were imperative. I was on my feet. Snap! Good God, we're in neutral! Miko, if he had not realized it before, was aware of it now. The moon disk moved visibly as the Planetara lurched. The vault of the heavens was slowly swinging. Miko ripped out a heavy oath.
Haljan, what is this?
He stood up, still holding Anita. But there was nothing that he could do in this emergency.
Haljan, what?
The heavens turned with a giant swoop. The moon was over us. It swung in dizzying arc. Overhead, then back past our stern. Under us, then appearing over our bow. The Planetara had turned over, upending, rotating end over end. For a moment or two, I think all of us in that turret stood and clung. The moon disk, the earth, sun, and all the stars were swinging past our windows. So horribly dizzying. The Planetara seemed lurching and tumbling. But it was an optical effect only. I stared with grim determination at my feet. The turret seemed to steady. Then I looked again. That horrible swoop of all the heavens. And the moon, as it went past, seemed expanded. We were falling. Out of control, with the moon gravity pulling us inexorably down.
That accursed Han!
Miko, stricken with his lack of knowledge of these controls, was wholly confused. A moment only had passed. My fancy that the moon disk was enlarged was merely the horror of my imagination. We had not fallen far enough yet for that. but we were falling. Unless I could do something, we would crash upon the lunar surface. Anita, killed in this Planetara turret, the end of everything for us. Action came to me. I gasped, "Miko, you stay here. The controls are dead. You stay here. Hold Anita." I ignored Moa's weapon, which she was still clutching mechanically. Snap thrust her away.
Sit back. Let us alone. We're falling. Don't you understand?
This deadly danger to level us all. No longer were we captors and captured. Not brigands for this moment. No thought of Grantline's treasure. Trapped humans only. Leveled by the common instinct of self-preservation. Trapped here together, fighting for our lives. Miko gasped.
Can you check us? What happened?
"I don't know. I'll try." I stood, clinging. This dizzying whirl. From the audiophone grid, Coniston's voice sounded.
"I say, Haljan, something's wrong. Han doesn't signal."
The lookout in the forward tower was clinging to his window. On the deck below our turret a member of the crew appeared, stood lurching for a moment, then shouted, and turned and ran, swaying, aimless. From the lower hull corridors our grid sounded with the tramping of running steps. Panic among the crew was spreading over the ship. A chaos below decks. I pulled at the emergency switch again. Dead. But down below there was the manual controls. "Snap, we must get down. The signals."
Yes.
Coniston's voice came like a scream from the grid.
"Han is dead! The controls are broken! Han is dead!"
We barely heard him. I shouted, "Miko, hold Anita! Come on, Snap!" We clung to the ladders. Snap was behind me.
Careful, Greg. Good God.
This dizzying whirl. I tried not to look. The deck under me was now a blurred kaleidoscope of swinging patches of moonlight and shadow. We reached the deck. Ran, swaying, lurching. It seemed that from the turret Anita's voice followed us. "Be careful!" Within the ship our senses steadied. With the rotating, reeling heavens shut out, there were only the shouts and tramping steps of the panic-stricken crew to mark that anything was amiss. That and a pseudo-sensation of lurching caused by the pulsing of gravity. A pull when the moon was beneath our hull to combine its force with our magnetizers. A lightning when it was overhead. A throbbing, pendulum lurch. That was all. We ran down to the corridor incline. A white-faced member of the crew came running up.
"What's happened? Haljan, what's happened?"
"We're falling." I gripped him. "Get below. Come on with us." But he jerked away from me.
"Falling?"
A steward came running.
"Falling? My God!"
Snap swung at them.
Get ahead of us. The manual controls, our only chance. We need all you men at the compressor pumps.
But it was an instinct to try and get on deck, as though here below we were rats caught in a trap. The men tore away from me and ran. Their shouts of panic resounded through the dim, blue-lit corridors. Coniston came lurching from the control room.
"I say, falling. Haljan, my God, look at him!"
Han was sprawled at the gravity plate switchboard. Sprawled, head down. Dead. Killed by something? Or a suicide? I bent over him. His hands gripped the main switch. He had ripped it loose. And his left hand had reached and broken the fragile line of tubes that intensified the current of the pneumatic plate shifters. A suicide? With his last frenzy determined to kill us all? Then I saw that Han had been killed. Not a suicide. In his hand he gripped a small segment of black fabric, a piece torn from an invisible cloak. Was it? The questions were swept away by the necessity for action. Snap was rigging the hand compressors. If he could get the pressure back in the tanks... I swung on Coniston. "You armed?" Yes? He was white-faced and confused, but not in a panic. He showed me his heat ray cylinder. What do you want me to do?
Round up the crew. Get all you can. Bring them here to man these pumps.
He dashed away. Snap shouted after him, "Kill them down if they argue."
Miko's voice sounded from the turret call grid.
Falling! Algen, you can see it now! Check us!
I did not answer that. I pumped with Snap. Desperate moments. Or was it an hour? Coniston brought the men. He stood over them with menacing weapon. We had all the pumps going. The pressure rose a little in the tanks, enough to shift a bow plate. I tried it. The plate slowly clicked into a new combination. A gravity repulsion just in the bow tip. I signaled Miko. Have we stopped swinging?
No, but slower.
I could feel it, that lurch of the gravity. But not steady now. A limp. A tendency of our bow was to stay up. More pressure, Snap.
Yes.
One of the crew rebelled, tried to bolt from the room.
God, we'll crash! Cotton here!
Coniston shot him down. I shifted another bow plate, then two in the stern. The stern plates seemed to move more readily than the others.
Run all the stern plates,
Snap advised. I tried it. The lurching stopped. Miko called.
We're bow down! Falling!
But not falling free. The moon gravity pull upon us was more than half neutralized. I'll go up, Snap, and try the engines. You don't mind staying down, executing my signals?
You idiot.
He gripped my shoulders. His eyes were gleaming, his face haggard, but his pale lips twitched with a smile.
Maybe it's goodbye, Greg. We'll fall. Fighting.
Yes, fighting. Coniston, you keep the pressure up. With the broken set tubes, it took nearly all the pressure to maintain the few plates I had shifted. One slipped back to neutral. Then the pumps gained on it, and it shifted again. I dashed up to the deck. The moon was so close now. So horribly close. The deck shadows were still. Through the forward bow windows, the moon's surface glared up at us. I reached the turret. The Planetara was steady. Pitched bow down, half falling, half sliding, like a rocket downward. The scarred surface of the moon spread wide under us. These last horrible minutes were a blur. And there was always Anita's face. She left Miko. Faced with death, he sat clinging. Ignoring her, Moa, too, sat apart, staring. And Anita crept to me. "Greg, dear one, the end." I tried the electronic engines from the stern, setting them in the reverse. The streams of their light glowed from the stern, forward along our hull, and flared down from our bow toward the lunar surface. But no atmosphere was here to give resistance. Perhaps the electronic streams checked our fall a little. The pumps gave us pressure, just in the last minutes, to slide a few of the hull plates. But our bow stayed down. We slid, like a spent rocket falling. I recall the horror of that expanding lunar surface, the maw of Archimedes yawning, a blob, widening to a great pit. Then I saw it was to one side, rushing upward. A phantasmagoria of uprushing crags, black and gray, spires tinged with earthlight. "Greg, dear one, goodbye." Her gentle arms around me. The end of everything for us. I recall murmuring, "Not falling free, Anita. Some hull plates are set." My dials showed another plate shifting, checking us a little further. Good old Snap. I calculated the next best plate to shift. I tried it. Slid it over. Good old Snap. Then everything faded but the feeling of Anita's arms around me. "Greg, dear one." The end of everything for us. There was an uprush of gray-black rock. An impact.
Chapter 22. The Hiss of Death. I opened my eyes to a dark blur of confusion. My shoulder hurt, a pain shooting through it. Something lay like a weight on me. I could not seem to move my left arm. Very queer. Then I moved it, and it hurt. I was lying twisted. I sat up, and with a rush, memory came. The crash was over. I am not dead. Anita. She was lying beside me. There was a little light here in this silent blur, a soft, mellow earthlight filtering in the window. The weight on me was Anita. As she lay sprawled, her head and shoulders halfway across my lap. Not dead! Thank God, not dead! She moved. Her arms went around me, and I lifted her. The earthlight glowed on her pale face, but her eyes opened, and she faintly smiled. It's past, Anita. We've struck, and we're still alive. I held her as though all life's turgid danger were powerless to touch us. But in the silence my floating senses were brought back to reality by a faint sound forcing itself upon me. A little hiss. The faintest murmuring breath like a hiss. Escaping air. I cast off her clinging arms. Anita, this is madness. For minutes we must have been lying there in the heaven of our embrace. But air was escaping. The Planetara's dome was broken, or cracked, and our precious air was hissing out. Full reality came to me at last. I was not seriously injured. I found that I could move freely. I could stand. A twisted shoulder, a limp left arm, but they were better in a moment. And Anita did not seem to be hurt. Blood was upon her, but not her blood. Beside Anita, stretched face down on the turret grid, was the giant figure of Miko. The blood lay in a small pool against his face. A widening pool. Moa was here. I thought her body twitched, then it was still. This soundless wreckage. In the dim glow of the wrecked turret with its two motionless, broken human figures, it seemed as though Anita and I were ghouls prowling. I saw that the turret had fallen over to the Planetara's deck. It lay dashed against the dome side. The deck was aslant. A litter of wreckage. A broken human figure showed, one of the crew who at the last must have come running up. The forward observation tower was down on the chart room roof. In its metal tangle I thought I could see the legs of the tower lookout. So this was the end of the Brigands' adventure. The Planetara's last voyage. How small and futile are human struggles. Miko's daring enterprise, so villainous, inhuman, brought all in a few moments to this silent tragedy. The Planetara had fallen 30,000 miles. But why? What had happened to Han? And where was Coniston down in this broken hull? And Snap! I thought suddenly of Snap. I clutched at my wandering wits. This inactivity was death. The escaping air hissed in my ears. Our precious air escaping away into the vacant desolation of the lunar emptiness. Through one of the twisted, slanting dome windows a rocky spire was visible. The Planetara lay bowed down, wedged in a jagged cradle of lunar rock. A miracle that the hull and dome had held together. Anita, we must get out of here. I thought I was fully alert now. I recalled that the Brigands had spoken of having partly assembled their moon equipment. If only we could find suits and helmets. We must get out, I repeated. Get to Grantline's camp. Their helmets are in the forward storage room, Greg. I saw them there. She was staring at the fallen Miko and Moa. She shuddered and turned away and gripped me. In the forward storage room by the port of the emergency lock exit. If only the exit locks would operate. We must get out of here, but find Snap first. Good old Snap. Would we find him lying dead? We climbed from the slanting, fallen turret over the wreckage of the littered deck. It was not difficult. A lightness was upon us. The Planetara's gravity magnetizers were dead. This was only the light moon gravity pulling us. Careful, Anita. Don't jump too freely. We leaped along the deck. The hiss of the escaping pressure was like a clanging gong of warning to tell us to hurry. The hiss of death so close. Snap, I murmured. Oh, Greg, I pray we may find him alive. And get out. We've got to rush it. Get out and find the Grantline camp. But how far? Which way? I must remember to take food and water. If the helmets were equipped with admission ports, if we could find Snap, if the exit locks would work to let us out. With a 15-foot leap, we cleared a pile of broken deck chairs. A man lay groaning near them. I went back with a rush. Not Snap, a steward. He had been a brigand, but he was a steward to me now. Get up. This is Haljan. Hurry, we must get out of here. The air is escaping. But he sank back and lay still. No time to find if I could help him. There were Anita and Snap to save. We found a broken entrance to one of the descending passages. I flung the debris aside and cleared it. Like a giant of strength with only this moon gravity holding me, I raised a broken segment of the superstructure and heaved it back. Anita and I dropped ourselves down the sloping passage. The interior of the wrecked ship was silent and dim. An occasional passage light was still burning. The passage and all the rooms lay askew. Wreckage everywhere. But the double dome and hull shell had withstood the shock. Then I realized that the Erentz system was slowing down. Our heat, like our air, was escaping, radiating away, a deadly chill settling upon everything. And our walls were bulging. The silence and the deadly chill of death would soon be here in these wrecked corridors. The end of the Planetara. I wondered vaguely if the walls would explode. We prowled like ghouls. We did not see Coniston. Snap had been by the shifter pumps. We found him in the oval doorway. He lay sprawled. Dead? No, he moved. He sat up before we could get to him. He seemed confused, but his senses clarified with the movement of our figures over him.
Greg? Why, Anita!
Snap, you're all right. We struck. The air is escaping. He pushed me away. He tried to stand.
I'm all right. I was up a minute ago. Greg, it's getting cold. Where is she? I had her here. She wasn't killed. I spoke to her.
Irrational. Snap! I held him, shook him. Snap, old fellow! He said normally.
Easy, Greg. I'm all right now.
Anita gripped him. Who, Snap?
She. There she is.
Another figure was here, on the grid floor by the door oval. A figure partly shrouded in a broken invisible cloak and hood. An invisible cloak! I saw a white face with opened eyes regarding me. The face of a girl. Venza! I bent down. You! Anita cried, Venza! Venza here? Why? How? My thoughts swept away. Venza here, dying? Her eyes closed, but she murmured to Anita, Where is he? I want him. Dying? I murmured impulsively. Here I am, Venza dear. Gently, as one would speak with gentle sympathy to humor the dying. Here I am, Venza. But it was only the confusion of the shock upon her. And it was upon us all. She pushed at Anita. I want him. She saw me. This whimsical Venus girl. Even here as we gathered, all of us blurred by the shock. Confused in the dim, wrecked ship with the chill of death coming, even here she could make a jest. Her pale lips smiled. You, Greg. I'm not hurt. I don't think I'm hurt. She managed to get herself up on one elbow. "Did you think I wanted you with my dying breath? Why, what conceit! Not you, handsome Haljan. I was calling Snap." He was down to her.
We're all right, Venza. It's over. We must get out of the ship. The air is escaping.
We gathered in the oval doorway. We fought the confusion of panic. "The exit port is this way."
The exit port is this way.
Or was it? I answered Snap. "Yes, I think so." The ship suddenly seemed a stranger to me, so cold, so vibrationless. Broken lights, these slanting, wrecked corridors. With the ventilating fans stilled, the air was turning fetid, chilling, and thinning with escaping pressure, rarefying so that I could feel the grasp of it in my lungs and the pinpricks of my burning cheeks. We started off, 4 of us still alive in this silent ship of death. My blurred thoughts tried to cope with it all. Venza here. I recalled how she had bade me create a diversion when the women passengers were landing on the asteroid. She had carried out her purpose. In the confusion, she had not gone ashore. A stowaway here. She had secured the cloak. Prowling, to try and help us, she had come upon Han, had seized his ray cylinder and struck him down, and been herself knocked unconscious by his dying lunge, which also had broken the tubes and wrecked the Planetara. And Venza, unconscious, had been lying here with the mechanism of her cloak still operating, so that we did not see her when we came and found why Han did not answer my signals.
It's here, Greg.
Snap and I lifted the pile of Moon equipment. We located 4 suits and helmets and the mechanisms to operate them. "More are in the chart room," Anita said. We needed no others. I robed Anita and showed her the mechanisms. "Yes, I understand." Snap was helping Venza. We were all stiff from the cold, but within the suits and their pulsing currents, the blessed warmth came again. The helmets had admission ports through which food and drink could be taken. I stood with my helmet ready. Anita, Venza, and Snap were bloated and grotesque beside me. We had found food and water here, assembled in portable cases which the brigands had prepared. Snap lifted them and signed to me he was ready. My helmet shut out all sounds save my own breathing, my pounding heart, and the murmur of the mechanism. The blessed warmth and pure air were good. We reached the hull port locks. They operated. We went through in the light of the headlamps over our foreheads. I closed the locks after us, an instinct to keep the air in the ship for the other trapped humans lying there. We slid down the sloping side of the Planetara. We were unweighted, irrationally agile with the slight gravity. I fell a dozen feet and landed with barely a jar. We were out on the lunar surface. A great sloping ramp of crags stretched down before us. Gray-black rock tinged with earthlight. The earth hung amid the stars in the blackness overhead like a huge section of a glowing yellow ball. This grim, desolate, silent landscape. Beyond the ramp, 50 feet below us, a tumbled, naked plain stretched away into blurred distances. But I could see mountains off there. Behind us, the towering, frowning rampart wall of Archimedes loomed against the sky. I had turned to look back at the Planetara. She lay broken, wedged between spires of upstanding rock. A few of her lights still gleamed. The end of the Planetara. The 3 grotesque figures of Anita, Venza, and Snap had started off. Hunchback figures with the tanks mounted on their shoulders. I bounded and caught them. I touched Snap. We made audiophone contact. Which way do you think?" I demanded.
I think this way, down the ramp, away from Archimedes, toward the mountains. It shouldn't be too far.
"You run with Venza. I'll hold Anita."
He nodded.
But we must keep together, Greg.
We could soon run freely. Down the ramp, out over the tumbled plain, bounding, grotesque, leaping strides. The girls were more agile, more skillful. They were soon leading us. The earth shadows of their figures leaped beside them. The Planetara faded into the distance behind us. Archimedes stood back there. Ahead, the mountains came closer. An hour, perhaps. I lost count of time. Occasionally, we stopped to rest. Were we going toward the Grantline camp? Would they see our tiny, waving headlights? Another interval. Then, far ahead of us on the ragged plain, lights showed. Moving tiny spots of light. Headlights on helmeted figures. We ran, monstrously leaping. A group of figures were off there. Grantline's party? Snap gripped me.
Grantline. We're safe, Greg. Safe.
He took his bulb light from his helmet. We stood in a group while he waved it. A semaphore signal. Grantline? And the answer came. Yes. You, Dean? Their personal code. No doubt of this. It was Grantline, who had seen the Planetara fall and had come to help us. I stood then with my hand holding Anita, and I whispered, "It's Grantline. We're safe, Anita, my darling." Death had been so close. Those horrible last minutes on the Planetara had shocked us, marked us. We stood, trembling, and Grantline and his men came bounding up. A helmeted figure touched me. I saw through the helmet pane the visage of a stern-faced, square-jawed, youngish man.
Grantline? Johnny Grantline? Yes,
Said his voice at my ear grid.
I'm Grantline. You're Haljan? Greg Haljan?
They crowded around us, gripped us to hear our explanations. Brigands! It was amazing to Johnny Grantline. But the menace was over now, as soon as Grantline had realized its existence. As though the wreck of the Planetara were foreordained by an all-wise providence, the Brigands' adventure had come to tragedy. We stood for a time, discussing it. Then I drew apart, leaving Snap with Grantline, and Anita joined me. I held her arm so that we had audiophone contact.
Anita mine. Greg, dear one.
Murmured nothings, which mean so much to lovers. As we stood in the fantastic gloom of the lunar desolation, with the blessed earthlight on us, I sent up a prayer of thankfulness. Not that 100 millions of treasure were saved, not that the attack upon Grantline had been averted, but only that Anita was given back to me. In moments of greatest emotion, the human mind individualizes. To me, there was only Anita. Life is very strange. The gate to the shining garden of our love seemed swinging wide to let us in. Yet I recall that a vague fear still lay on me. A premonition? I felt a touch on my arm. A bloated helmet visor was thrust near my own. I saw Snap's face peering at me.
Grantline thinks we should return to the Planetara. Might find some of them alive.
Grantline touched me.
It's only humanity. Yes,
I said. We went back, some 10 of us, a line of grotesque figures bounding with slow, easy strides over the jagged, rock-strewn plain. Our lights danced before us. The Planetara came at last into view. My ship. Again that pang swept me as I saw her. This, her last resting place. She lay here in her open tomb, shattered, broken, unbreathing. The lights on her were extinguished. The Erentz system had ceased to pulse. The heart of the dying ship, for a while beating faintly, but now at rest. We left the 2 girls with some of Grantline's men at the admission port. Snap, Grantline, and I, with 3 others, went inside. There still seemed to be air, but not enough so that we dared remove our helmets. It It was dark inside the wrecked ship. The corridors were black. The hull control rooms were dimly illumined with the earthlight straggling through the windows. This littered tomb, already cold and silent with death. We stumbled over a fallen figure, a member of the crew. Grantline straightened from examining him. Dead. Earthlight fell on the horrible face. Puffed flesh, bloated red from the blood which had oozed from its pores in the thinning air. I looked away. We prowled further. Han lay dead in the pump room. The body of Coniston should have been near here. We did not see it. We climbed up to the slanting littered deck. The dome had not exploded, but the air up here had almost all hissed away. Again Grantline touched me.
At the turret? Yes.
No wonder he asked. The wreckage was all so formless. We climbed after Snap into the broken turret room. We passed the body of that steward who just at the end had appealed to me and I had left dying. The legs of the forward lookout still poked grotesquely up from the wreckage of the observatory tower where it lay smashed down against the roof of the chart room. We shoved ourselves into the turret. What was this? No bodies here. The giant Miko was gone. The pool of his blood lay congealed into a frozen dark splotch on the metal grid. And Moa was gone. They had not been dead. Had dragged themselves out of here, fighting desperately for life. We would find them somewhere around here. But we did not. Nor Coniston. I recalled what Anita had said. Other suits and helmets had been here in the nearby chart room. The brigands had taken them, and food and water doubtless, and escaped from the ship, following us through the lower admission ports only a few minutes after we had gone out. We made careful search of the entire ship. 8 of the bodies which should have been here were missing. Miko, Moa, Coniston, and 5 of the Stewart crew. We did not find them outside. They were hiding near here, no doubt, more willing to take their chances than to yield now to us. But how, in all this lunar desolation, could we hope to locate them?
No use,
said Grantline.
Let them go. If they want death, well, they deserve it.
But we were saved. Then, as I stood there, realization leaped at me. Saved? Were we not indeed fatuous fools? In all these emotion-swept moments since we had encountered Grantline, memory of that brigand ship coming from Mars had never once occurred to Snap or me. I told Grantline now. His eyes through the visor stared at me blankly.
What?
I told him again. It would be here in 8 days, fully manned and armed.
But, Helgen, we have almost no weapons. All my Comet space was taken with mining equipment and the mechanisms for my camp. I can't signal Earth. I was depending on the Planetara.
It surged upon us. The brigand menace past? We were blindly congratulating ourselves on our safety. But it would be 8 days or more before in distant Ferric Shan the non-arrival of the Planetara would cause any real comment. No one was searching for us. No one was worried over us. No wonder the crafty Miko was willing to take his chances out here in the lunar wilds. His ship, his reinforcements, his weapons were coming rapidly. And we were helpless, almost unarmed, marooned here on the moon with our treasure. To be continued. And that concludes part 2 of Brigands of the Moon, the book of Greg Haljan, part 2 of a 4-part novel. From the pages of Astounding Stories of a Super Science, April 1930. So yeah, pretty rad. Things are intense. They do seem to be just kind of jumping from one crisis to another, but that's how you keep people engaged. So yeah, how about that? Can't wait to get to the next part of that. We are halfway done now. I do this every Saturday. Story time Saturdays, hardy har har. At about noon Eastern Standard Time, I stream to Facebook, Twitch, Mixer. Normally I stream to YouTube, but I'm having some account issues there. So I'm just posting the recorded videos up on YouTube. Usually that's about a week behind or so. Oops, sorry. I am not timely with that. I also have other streams throughout the week. I have a Mecha Mondays stream where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. What I'm planning on doing this coming Monday, unless I have a total brainstorm or brilliant eureka moment, is do a game I've wanted to stream called Rengoku on the PSP. I think it's the first one is Rengoku 1. What's the subtitle? Not Tower of Heaven. That's the second one. Oh, I don't remember. It's some reference to Dante, I think, but I don't remember what specifically. Um, I'll have the title when the time comes. And it's basically like Dark Souls if Dark Souls were a uh, where in Dark Souls you played as a mutating murder android. It'll make sense, I promise, when you see the game. Probably. Probably not. It's a weird one. But yeah, all the Dark Souls elements that everyone or Souls-like elements that everyone has come to know and love are there. Because let's face it, Dark Souls did not originate that formula. Other games have done the same thing prior, and this particular title predates Dark Souls by half a decade, something like that. It's a couple of years. Heck, it predates Demon Souls by a couple of years. Kingsfield, on the other hand, predates the game I'm going to be playing. And Kingsfield is kind of the spiritual prequel to the Souls series in many ways. It's most of those are on the PS1. I can't remember how many of those we got in the States. Possibly some came to Europe and didn't come to the States. I don't know for sure. I also have a stream on Wednesday, Warframe Wednesdays, where I do Warframey stuff. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and hope to see you next week. Have a good one, folks. Pleasure as always.